Because of the way the universe is created, we each of us live in two worlds at the same time. We have to live in the outer life of our own bodies and the inner life of our own souls.
Hello and welcome to Living the Inner Life. I'm your host, Chris Sheridan, and I want you to join with me on a journey into our inner lives, our thoughts, feelings, beliefs, everything that helps shape the way we respond to and interact with the outside world. And if we can utilize our tools of consciousness, we can live a better life, inner, outer, and in our total experience. Well, one thing we experience quite a bit in life is conflict, many different kinds. Now, it's been said that there are 4 basic conflicts in the human experience, and that's man against nature, man against man, man against God, and man against himself, which is what I want to talk about today, this enemy within. And I want to see if we can understand how this enemy, if it is such a thing, really works and how we can't turn this enemy into an ally. Okay, so back to the 4 major conflicts. Man versus nature is probably the very first one because as human beings, we are not really well prepared physically to live in this world. Okay, we don't have the fur or the fangs or the claws and all these things that many other animals do. Every other animal has some sort of a defensive or survival aspect to their physical being, whether that's the ability to run fast or fly high or just have a lot of fur to where you don't freeze in the winter. We don't have that, but we've overcome that through technology because one thing that we do have that the other animals don't really seem to have as much is our capacity to learn, to invent, to utilize tools and technology to make shelters and environmental devices that help us survive in various different climates that we wouldn't be able to otherwise. Okay, so not that we've conquered nature so much, but it's not so much the law of the jungle. Okay, we're not as susceptible to attacks from wild animals or the weather, although the animals are there, the weather is still there, and we can still be very much affected by it. But the point is we have much better housing and self-defense and structures that help us survive through nature because, face it, Earth can be a very difficult place to live. It's a very beautiful planet, but it can be very harsh at times. Okay, but the normal state is more of a peaceful, harmonious balance of nature. Let's call it that. Well, the next conflict, man versus man, we are nowhere near at the moment overcoming that. That's something we still participate with, whether it's friendly competition or it's cutthroat business on Wall Street or in the marketplace, or in its most ridiculous, absurd, and tragic form, war, man versus man. We're one of the few animals that kills for reasons other than survival, other than to eat. And certainly we've learned to kill so many of our own kind. It's not, and we don't even eat them. So it's not even cannibalism. It's war, it's murder, it's devastation, and all those things. And we have not overcome that yet. And I think if we get further along to these other conflicts, we may understand why. But for whatever reason, that seems to be something that's been in our history, and it seems to be in our present. Doesn't, I don't think, necessarily have to be in our future if we can get along with nature and ourselves and each other in so many other ways. So the next major conflict is man versus God. And that has to do with our own existence, our purpose for being here. If there is a creator, who is this creator? What's our relationship to this being, this entity, this energy? Are we left alone to our own devices? Are we under some strict control? Or are we completely open to have free will and do things and change things? Maybe we have powers endowed by our creator, if that's such a thing. And where this man versus God really comes into play, first of all, is whether or not there is this belief of a creator being. Okay, that we were somehow designed, designated, and put here on earth to learn and grow and whatever the reasons for our existence are, but that it was conscious, okay? There is some intelligence in this design of our human beings, of our bodies, and our purpose for being here, okay? And that is the conflict there with not believing as to believing, but in the believing context, there's a lot of competition, and this is a little bit of man versus man, because there may be one person's belief in their God and somebody else's belief in their God. And even though ostensibly both believe in God, they may not believe in the same God or the same things, or really have the same notion of what it means to be a human and how to go about life on earth. Very different morals, very different ways of worshiping, different ways of living in the world and treating each other and ourselves and nature. Okay, so that's a very big one, and it doesn't always get talked about. I know in some spiritual traditions, there is this ability to either negotiate with God, or in the case of Jacob, wrestling with the angel. Job had discussions and conflict with God directly that way. There is the mystic sense of communing with God, that God is everywhere, that His presence is felt in every aspect of creation, not just in a building or in a certain situation, but it's just everywhere. There's also the Hindu legend of Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, and that Krishna came, and when Arjuna was having trouble fulfilling what many believe to be his destiny in carrying out this warfare against others of his kind, that Krishna came down and explained to him that it was part of this larger drama, this larger play, that he was an actor and he had to do his duty because that's part of his reason for being there and then at that place and at that time. But it was certainly questioned. Okay, so we can question the existence of God, we can question or debate the nature of God and what that means to us, and we can appeal directly, whether that's through prayer or this negotiating or bargaining, perhaps, with God. Any way you want to do it, there are so many ways, but there seems to be this conflict. We are a strange hybrid in a sense. We are very much earth creatures. We live and walk and exist on this planet. We have to drink the water, breathe the air, eat the plants and animals that grow on this earth, use the resources in the earth to build things, to extract ore, to make metal, to do all the things that we as human beings do. But it's only using what is here, what we have been, I guess, endowed with, what we've been left to use, like we're on a desert island and these are the resources that we have. Okay, so it can be difficult in our human, more, I guess, animalistic sense to survive, but we're not surviving on instinct. We are aware of our own place in the world, even though we may not understand it completely. We do have this sense of being in the world at this time. And then there's this spiritual sense, this soul part of ourselves, this connection. We look up to the stars and have a sense of longing or belonging. So we're kind of in the middle, okay? We're earth creatures, but we don't have all the instinct and the fur and the fangs that the beasts have. We seem to be spiritual creatures, having this physical experience, this physical existence, and yet we're somehow removed from God, okay? Or that we were thrown out of the garden or things like that. So anyway, this conflict about God is actually moving us closer to what I initially said I wanted to talk about, and that's man versus himself or herself or yourself, me against me. Okay, and that's a very difficult battle because nature is out there. The other people are out there. God is up there, out there, in here, wherever, anywhere, nowhere, all at once. Yet, if we are in conflict with ourself, how do you hide? How do you run from that? How do you attack that? How do you win? If you destroy yourself in this you versus you, well, which one gets destroyed? Which one survives? Are there two of you? How can I be in conflict with myself if there's just one of me? And like a house divided, I think that's where this internal conflict is. It's not that there are two of us, but if we become internally divided, whether that's our head and our heart, that our thoughts and our convictions and our intelligence and our knowledge can somehow go against or be in conflict with the affairs of the heart, what we feel, what we long, what this passional part of our nature that William James talked about. And he even said that when it comes down to this conflict, if it's a competition between the head and the heart, or what he called our rational and passional natures, the passional always wins. And this is why you can see and read about people who otherwise are very intelligent, very successful in so many ways, can fall to the most basic human failings, whether that's sex or greed or despair or any other emotional response that we have to the world and how that affects us individually and personally. We've seen great people take great falls that you would think, well, gosh, don't they know better? They weren't thinking better. They didn't go along with what their convictions were, and their conduct is maybe opposite of that or certainly at odds with it. Okay, that's this disunity, or non-congruence where what we say and what we do are really the same thing. What we believe and how we behave are lined up, they are harmonious. Okay, and this disharmony, this dissonance, is where we have this separation or this different way of looking at things. Okay, so this conflict may be more of a sense of how we're looking at things. So if you're in whatever situation it is in your life, you may have thoughts about it. You may have a rational, logical way of looking at it, of processing what is going on, of developing an idea on how to respond or what that means to you. And that can be very different than if you experience this very same situation at the same time using a different part of your being, using your heart, using this emotional, more passional nature. It can look at things in a completely different way, this part of yourself, this lens through which you are viewing and experiencing the world. It can be very, very different and for different reasons because it looks at things in a different way and has a different database of experience and resource, anything that helps understand through that lens. Okay, so this man versus himself, this internal conflict is probably at the root of most of the other conflicts. And even man versus nature. Well, we'll start with that. So if we're divided with ourselves, if we're not living harmonious inside our own being, how can we really live harmoniously with nature? We're out of step with nature, okay? And since we are part of nature, as we are out of step with nature, we are out of step with ourselves. As we are in conflict with nature, we are also in conflict with ourselves. So we can approach this internal struggle, this enemy within, the same way that we approach the environment, nature. We can look at the environment as an enemy, the climate, the animals, the weather, anything that is going on in the world. But we've conquered that, but we've conquered it not to the degree of survival, but also to where we can actually do harm now to nature. Okay? It used to be nature was winning, and now it seems like nature's losing at our hand because we're overextending resources. But worst of all, I think we're just separated from it. We don't live as close to the land. We don't raise the animals that we slaughter to eat. We don't grow the vegetables and things that we eat the way that we used to do before. You used to have to walk to the well and pull up a bucket of water and bring it into the house. You had to chop wood and, make a fire. You had to cut down the tree, first of all, in your backyard, chop it up, bring it in, put it on the stove, and heat your house with it, in the fireplace, in the hearth. So we just turn a knob on the wall. Now it seems so far removed. So we're out of step. Now, we're not going to go back and live, off the grid and, in the wilderness. A few people can. That's not really realistic. We've sort of gone past that, but you can still reconnect with nature. And as you can do that, take your shoes off, put your feet in the grass, look at the sun, spend the first half hour in the morning if you can, 20 minutes maybe, have your coffee out in the sun, or at least by a window that maybe some sun can come in if it's cold out, that you can stay connected with nature. Look up, see the stars, look at the phase of the moon, anything and everything you can do to keep that connection while still living in modern society with technology and cities and automobiles and all these other things that we have. Okay. Also, the conflict with each other, I think, is a lot of times a psychological projection of this internal conflict. So if you're mad at your neighbor, whether that's your actual neighbor that lives in the house or apartment next door, or if it's a neighboring neighborhood, the other side of town, the other side of the tracks, or if it's your neighbor in a neighboring country that you're at war with, it's, I believe, a projection. It's not just, well, the projection is psychological, but when it lands on somebody else, that conflict is real. So a lot of times we lash out at another person because we are in some ways lashing out at ourselves. If we project our shadow on another person, then we can go, oh, look at you. Look at what you're doing wrong. And I must defeat you, destroy you, whatever I need to do so I can be okay. But really, that's something that's going on inside. So see how it keeps folding back to our inner life. These projections out there. And again, man versus God, that is us connecting with our own spiritual nature, not some belief or some dogma or some religion or things like that. Or those are supposed to help us stay connected with each other and with our higher power. But if we've become removed from that, or that's somehow a sour relationship, if we do have that spiritual nature in ourselves, as much as we have the animal nature, being a human being, that we are out of step, we are out of harmony, out of communication, out of touch with it. It's not that we've lost it, but that connection isn't there. So the goal then is to be more and more connected. So to approach this conflict, man versus himself, you versus you, me versus me, as you connect better with nature, you can connect better with yourself. As you connect better with other people, you can connect better with yourself, and same with a spiritual deity or being or entity, the spiritual nature of yourself. Okay? But since this is living the inner life, we know that more of the power lies with ourselves. So, to flip that around, if we can become more harmonious within, if we can approach this man versus himself conflict and come into alignment, reach a peace agreement. First of all, a ceasefire, but a peace treaty where you can live together. And maybe the conquered enemy that was so dangerous before can be reintegrated and become an ally. Okay? You can't really divide yourself in half and then destroy one of the halves. Both halves will die. You need to bring it in needs to be reshaped, reconfigured, reconceptualized, and reformed and reintegrated, because a lot of what becomes sour, what becomes this point of conflict, are parts of ourselves maybe that we haven't dealt with completely, these shadow elements that have been shoved down, whether it's past trauma or disappointments, regrets, resentments. That's a good one. We can shove them down, and without proper expression, like a pond that doesn't have a spillway and some sort of, a circulatory system, will turn to a swamp. Okay, that's just the natural response when it's not functioning properly. It will turn into a swamp. Or if your blood vessels become clogged because you're eating poorly, or anything like that, a lot of times these, what appear to be major problems or huge symptoms, are really just a result of something else being wrong. And this is sort of the natural expression of it. Okay, so you can't keep things in under pressure so long. The lid will blow off eventually. And that's what happens psychologically. And it's known as a Pluto crisis. That is Pluto, the god of the underworld, that if at certain points in your life, if you're not dealing and properly addressing these parts of yourself that have either become broken off or, like I said, shoved down in the shadow, they will arise in some form of a crisis, whether that's an injury or a divorce or just a coming to yourself, maybe a mental and emotional breakdown, in the sense that it just finally shoved itself up from the underneath, and now it's in your face and you have to deal with it. Okay? And you can take a proactive stance in this you versus you. Okay? Look in the mirror. Maybe there are two of you, two of me, but they're probably both sides of the same coin. Okay? Might be on opposite sides, like the head and the heart, might look at things differently, but invite it in. These parts of yourself that are so unmanageable or so difficult to accept, bring them out into the open. Let them be known to you, and let yourself be known, this greater part of yourself, that, okay, come back and be part of my life. Let's work together. Okay, you need the light and the shadow, the in and the out, the up and the down, the black and the white, and all the yin and the yang permutations of these opposites. These opposites need to be in harmony, not in conflict. If they are not addressed properly, if they are not expressed fully and in a reasonable, rational way, then they will become problematic. Okay? So, in this conflict with yourself, win. Both of you, both these sides of you can win. Because a lot of these, whether it's self-sabotage or whatever form this enemy within, and I'm using enemy in quotes, whatever form that takes, it's usually because it hasn't been brought in. It's something that needs to be matured. It's something that needs to be developed, needs to be integrated. Okay? And then you can have a more harmonious relationship with yourself, with your inner self. And then, as you do, you will notice that your relationships with other people, your relationship to nature, and especially your connection to a higher power, a greater part of yourself, allow that in. Allow that to be the mediator. Okay? If this internal conflict is like two kids squabbling or bickering or fighting each other, as siblings often do, think of this higher power or this God sense as a parent that comes in and holds both of you, both of your hands on either side, keeping connected and also keeping separated, keeping from destroying or pestering each other for too long. Okay? So you're not going to win by fighting this enemy within and defeating it. You're going to win by understanding what seems to be an enemy. If it's procrastination or self-sabotage, it's probably just a misguided survival tactic or defense mechanism. But it's expressing itself as an adversary. Make it an ally, and you will win within. And I want to hear about your journey within and more about this internal conflict. I think it's a huge topic for discussion, but I think we'll leave it at that for now. And thank you for joining with me here on Living the Inner Life.